Guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Today we're back here with PhantomStrider again. This just uploaded today, actually. It's the 10 banned books and why were they banned. So yeah, we all heard those books that got banned for certain reasons. I actually do remember a Reddit story about a teacher that accidentally bought a banned book where it was about 2 gay penguins, if I remember correctly. So I'm not too sure of any other, like, banned books. Honestly, I don't think any come to mind other than the ones that just hate groups just don't like it, so we must ban it from schools. You know, those types. Yeah, might as well see why these books got banned and see what happened. Be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Here we go.
Howdy, howdy.
Howdy.
Nowadays, when many people read, it's mostly captions, websites, and social media. But people don't necessarily read a lot of books anymore. They might listen to some, but reading, not so much. Though I still find it fascinating to see which books have been banned, censored, or challenged by states and lobbying groups. Or sometimes even entire federal governments. What made people demand that these books be removed from shelves? In the first half of 2023 alone, there were 531 attempts to censor books in the USA. You know, it kind of reminds me of the restricted section in Harry Potter. The more they tell me you can't see this, the more I want to. Anyway, let's check
you ain't wrong there. It's not really helping your case if you got it.
Throughout history. I've tried to focus more on the modern banned books, but I've thrown in a few older banned books for some perspective.
There's Catcher.
And obviously, there will be some discussion of some very sensitive, difficult subjects. But
yeah, if you don't want to handle it, you might want to just step back. It might help yourself.
I'll try my best to give you a respectful, thoughtful look as to why. With that preamble aside, let's
go get started. First
10.
up, number 10.
Captain Underpants. Behold, the most frequently banned children's book in America. It's astonishing how often this silly 12-book series gets banned in schools. But as the book writer himself, Dave Pikey, points out...
Dave?
No profanity, no sex, no nudity, no drugs, no smoking, no alcohol, no guns, and no more violence than a children's superhero cartoon.
In fact, this story is as cheesy and silly as it gets. 2 fourth-grade boys named George and Harold brainwash their principal, Mr. Krupp. They make him believe he's the superhero Captain Underpants. And that's
actually their things.
The books don't instruct children on how to Nazi salute. They don't give a step-by-step guide on building a bomb. It's just a bunch of silly stories about these kids and their principal Captain Underpants. Despite this, throughout the years, all the books in the series have been faced with bans. So what got
I think I actually stopped after a while.
American Library Association's top 100 most banned books. Schools and lobbying groups
probably just the Underpants.
Like the main characters. They said George and Harold were disrespectful to authority, and there was inappropriate humor. Censorship attempts got even worse in the 12th book, because it was revealed that one of our main characters, Harold, is gay. Because in the far future, he marries another guy. Why is that a problem? Please
that makes sense.
Because of these lobbying groups' religion? Well, maybe they should try the Hello Kitty religion.
Yeah.
Alright, let's take SpongeBob as an example for a second, as the show primarily aims at the same demographic as Captain Underpants. I could say SpongeBob is also disruptive to authority for crashing various vehicles, causing property damage and disrupting Miss Puff's teaching at boating school. Or Plankton is disruptive for trying to steal from Mr. Krabs' legitimate business practice. But if someone really does think SpongeBob is a bad influence on their kids, well, they can ban it in their home. And frankly, in 2024, parents or organizations should be thankful that their kids put down their tablets and phones to open a book at all. Captain Underpants. Captain Underpants has gotten so many kids reading, and we shouldn't stand in the way of it. To quote the author Dave again, we can make a simple change to better the world, rather than saying,
I don't want children to read this book.
We could instead say,
I don't want my children to read this book.
That way we can still show our concerns, but also preserve the freedom for every person to choose what they learn and think for themselves.
Honestly, I could think it's like the potty humor, because there's like Stir Sinklock, Pee Pee Poopy Pants, or something like that. Honestly, I don't remember much of the books. I think I stopped after a while. It was like the, So I'm trying to like remember where I last left off. Don't remember the Stink Salt one. Let's see. I remember the the wedgie girl. Remember the beginning. Poop pants. I think the guy also turned into a mutant, so that's 4. So I think I only read half of them. Actually, wait, does the superhero grandparents thing, was that separate? I can't remember. So I think I only read 5 of the 5 of the 8. I don't know. I'm about to look to see how many more were like in that series, because honestly, I don't remember it. Anyway, next, number 9.
Number 9.
See what you got.
And Tango Makes 3. This is a children's book from
Now,
2005.
this I remember.
It
This was
talks
actually
about
the
2
Reddit story I heard
penguins
about.
from the zoo, but these 2 male penguins were a little bit different. Roy and Silo did everything together. It's a beautiful story about these 2 penguins starting a family. And it's never explicit or lewd. In fact, it's based on 2 real-life penguins
Yeah,
at the Central
so
Park
based on
Zoo.
true stories.
But Roy and Silo soon realize they can't do what a lot of other penguin couples can do and fertilize eggs. They want a family too, so the zookeeper gives them an orphaned egg, and they care for and adopt the egg. That's
See?
it. Isn't that nice? Sadly,
Yeah.
LGBTQIA media was less accepted when this book was published in 2005.
Basically,
and
they don't
book
like
is
the
still
gays.
challenged and banned today, so we're still having problems with it.
Pan America has counted 84 titles no longer available to kids in the Florida district.
The ALA reports that Tango Makes 3 was the most contested book from 2006 to 2010. As there's 0 actual violence, sensual content, or graphic depictions of anything, the majority of bans seem to have happened because these 2 penguins are male and they're starting a family. But again, it's based on real penguins at the zoo. And various scientific studies, such as from the Imperial College of London, have found that animal homosexuality is common in over 1,000 species of the animal kingdom. One of them, of course, being penguins. Bisexuality in animals was even more common. Many researchers are fascinated about how this all fits into evolution. But you know what? I'll make this even easier for people who still want to ban the book. They don't even have to read a single dry scientific article, because they can see Tango Makes 3 in real life at my local aquarium in Australia. Meet Sven and Magic.
Hey guys.
Hi, I'm Tish from Sea Life Sydney Aquarium, and I'm happy to announce that our strongest power couple, Sven and Magic, are still together for the 2nd year in a row.
Like Roy and Silo, they live in a zoo or an aquarium. According to Sea Life Sydney's zookeepers,
Sven and Magic continue to have the biggest and most neatly stacked nest in the exhibit.
you go guys, and congratulations on hatching a
And
Sven
screw those homophobes for banning this great book.
When I asked Sven and Magic directly how they'd been going raising Svengic, they said... Then I realized, you know...
Yeah, dumb.
And what's the 8th banned book?
Number 8, coming up.
50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James.
Yeah, you can definitely see what's going on here.
Your inner goddess is about to explode.
Stop.
Oh, I read these. These books are funny.
They're a naughty.
They're funny?
In fact, they're among your favorites, if I remember right. It's also number
What?
8 in the top 100 most banned books.
Sheesh.
What do you think? Do they have much worth banning?
No way. They aren't even raunchy. I'd barely give them an M.
I feel more like Anastasia and Christian's lack of chemistry should be banned. Well, let's investigate. Some
It's
people
because
know
of the
50
film, I
Shades
think?
is a comedy, but I suspect it was intended to be an ero romance novel. The book is primarily being banned and challenged in the United States, supposedly because it's sensually explicit and quote-unquote religious viewpoints.
I never remember them bringing up religion in the books.
And we
Thank
watched
you.
the movies like 4 times, and I don't remember any religion being in there either. But you know, even in early
So-
drafts, the book was plagued by controversy. You see, originally, 50 Shades was an internet Twilight fan fiction series titled Master of the Universe. I'm not kidding.
Have the power!
The author, Erica James, aka Snow Queen Ice Dragon, posted her fanfiction on various websites. And from now on, I'm going to call her Snow Queen Ice Dragon because that is the best title ever.
That is
Originally,
kinda cool.
50 Shades characters were named Edward and Bella, but Snow Queen
Yeah,
Ice
remember
Dragon was
Twilight
immediately
fanfic?
hit by comments
So, like,
concerned about the sensual nature of her fanfiction. Struck back by controversy, Snow Queen
So
Ice
that's
Dragon
a nope.
removed her Twilight fan fiction from websites. Oh, could this story get any better? But not one to give up. Snow Queen Ice Dragon instead posted her stories on her own website, 50shades.com, which I was
Wow.
delighted to find is still active, and it's just
Nice.
adorable. Before trying to publish her story, because why not?
Why not?
She instead changed the names from Edward and Bella to
So, nope.
Anastasia Steele and Christian Grey. It all makes
Yep,
sense now.
Steele and Grey,
How does
there you
no
go.
one ever talk about this origin story? This is even funnier than the books themselves. When reached
There
for
you go.
comment, Stephanie Meyer, the author of Twilight, said,
It's not really my genre, not my thing, but good on her. She's doing well. That's great.
and good on her for being such a good sport about it.
Raunchy part,
Try
I
to
wish that
encourage
wasn't
it, not
attached to
that-
Twilight, just because I don't like to think of it that way, but you know, it doesn't
Do
doesn't
you?
hurt Twilight.
An author I wanted to talk about but couldn't, Salmon Rushdie, also
Hi,
commented on the book. He said,
What'd he say?
I've never read anything so badly written that got published in my entire life.
so why
I
all
guess
the
whatever works for you, I guess.
Despite 50 Shades selling over 150 million copies,
Yeah.
it's been criticized due to its depictions of BD bedroom stuff. Some
BDSM,
experts
basically.
on that particular topic say it shows incorrect and possibly
Yeesh.
dangerous techniques. And that makes sense because coinciding with 50 Shades release, injuries related to BD
Well-
stuff and toy use spiked dramatically. In fact, hospital
Whoops.
visits increased by over 50%. Consistently from 2010 to 2019, 50
remember-
Shades was among
I
the
think I actually
8
remember that
most
one.
banned books in the USA. Hey Nin, do they have any other reasons listed?
Because it's sensually explicit, contains nudity, offensive language, and, honey, I still don't get the religious viewpoints thing.
Yeah, I
You got
looked,
me.
but I couldn't find any reasoning for that one either. Florida went
don't
on
even
to
read it.
remove copies of 50 Shades from their library shelves, with claims it didn't meet their selection criteria and reviews of the book had been poor. They're trying to ban a book for being badly written? Really? But due to hugely popular demand, eventually Florida had to make their copies available. Now don't get me wrong, there's absolutely major problems with the relationship with Christian and Anastasia. Christian descends into stalker behavior and being overly controlling many times. But it literally started as an internet Twilight fan fiction by Snow Queen Ice Dragon. What could we expect? So if you're not hurting
Fair.
anyone and you enjoy it, you go right ahead. And no offense meant against E.L. James or Snow Queen Ice Dragon. I know what it's like to put your work out there, and it really struck a chord with people and made a lot of people happy, and that's great.
Fair enough.
And 7, lucky 7. Tricks by Ellen Hopkins. According to
What's
PEN
this for?
America, this was the #1 most frequently banned book in the 2023 school year, with over 33 bans. That's
33?
impressive. So why all the kerfuffle?
Yeah, what
Well,
happened?
The summary of the book itself reveals a lot. 5 troubled teenagers fall into prostitution as they search for freedom, safety, community, and love. Tricks is known for its gritty realism, but an interesting twist is the book is written in verse, similar to poetry,
Oh,
but this
poetry.
certainly doesn't take away from the intensity of the writing. All 5 of our teen main characters are deeply troubled, with some downright rotten parents. Eden's story is a good example.
Oof.
She's sent off to Christian rehabilitation camp because her heavily Christian father has decided she's being controlled by quote-unquote demonic influences. Why does he think she's under demonic influences?
Well,
Why? Because she's dating a non-Christian guy. Seriously, dude, why not try the Hello Kitty religion?
Hey,
no
Gab.
torturing your daughter required. I mean, I'm not a member, but these two are.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I'm good.
Eden's eventually able to
Still.
escape the camp through sensual favors and eventually runs away to Vegas. Unsure of how to survive, she's forced into prostitution, though eventually she is able to escape. This may sound horrifying, but when I looked at Goodreads, many people love this book. I like the way
Painful,
Nancy
also
described
very
the
what?
book in her review.
Tricks broke my heart and made my stomach churn. These stories were
Damn.
gripping, painful and honest. My own teenage
honesty.
years, painful memories, and wrong choices all came flooding back.
It's a book about managing tough choices and bitter loneliness, but also glimmers of hope and accepting who you are. And that, to me, is real artistic value. Even if I don't think
That's
it
a
was
point.
for everyone, I certainly don't think Tricks should have been banned as much as it was. And
Honestly, looking at it, I can definitely see it, but it might be the whole, like, oh, it makes fun of, like, Christian camps, which, well, honestly, that needs to be stopped immediately, to be honest, because, jeez, like, the amount of times it had to, like, you'd think at some point they would have updated the practices, but nope, they just said, screw you. Jeez. Sorry, I'm just saying. I understand some of these, but they just seem very dumb. You know? I feel like that one, yeah. I can definitely see where they're banning it, because, you know, it's kind of like taking pot shots at Christianity, which sometimes your religion has to take the pot shots in order to improve, you know? Otherwise, you're just going to be a spawn of Satan. Think about it. I'm just saying. I mean, this is coming from Christian myself, so yeah. Honestly, I would have just said, you know what, just let it be real, you know? But yeah, Florida seems like the most banned place. And again, it's Florida. What do you expect? Moving along.
for number
6. What do you got?
Ulysses. Over a
1922
century old,
Ulysses?
this is among the original banned books. In fact, it was
So-
immediately banned upon its original publication. Back
What
in
happened?
1921, the author, Joyce, found
James
himself
Joyce.
in an obscenity trial in the USA. Because of this book, he was found guilty under the laws of 1873, and the book
Yikes.
series was forcibly halted and immediately banned. The publisher was even fined £100. Scandalous. So what caused all this
different money
fuss
back
in
then.
the 1920s? Well,
So what's the
Ulysses
book?
had some sensual passages, and there was a particular self-gratification scene that was the main reason for the ban. After the USA banned Ulysses, the UK also went on to ban the book. Copies were seized and burned by both the US Postal Service and the British ports. Apparently in the 1920s,
Jeez.
the US Postal Service also had the job of burning books. Jeebus.
What are we, the
Despite
Nazis?
this, the book was still a huge hit on the black market. I can just see someone going up and being like,
Yo,
"Hey
yo,
man,
got
you
Ulysses?
got the goods? It's Ulysses.
Gotcha,
Oh,
right here."
The real deal?
Yep.
Yeah, but just
It's
keep it
good
to
as
yourself.
well.
Oh man,
in there.
I'm gonna do so much reading tonight. Of course,
get 'em.
nowadays the book has been circulated widely. So, you know, in the 1920s we could figure out the Spanish flu vaccine, but we couldn't allow adults to read about something that almost every adult does. Number 5.
Feels like worried about.
Genderqueer, a memoir by Maya Kobabe. This had 41 bans in the
Yeah.
2021 to
Genderqueer.
2022 school year
Jeez,
alone.
41?
And 15 bans as recent as 2023. Ever since its publication in 2019, Genderqueer has remained among the most banned books in the United
151?
States. This book has even been
Claimed to be
removed in
sexually
some libraries
explicit.
in my country as well. And yes, Florida also banned the book in libraries from every district.
Well, now I know where not to get my
Surprising
books.
no one at
Florida.
this point. We're in for a treat though, as these memoirs are a graphic novel. They walk the reader through the author's struggles with gender dysphoria and being accepted into society as an asexual. Supporters of this book say it can help confused teens identify by providing a language for the trans and non-binary community. And I believe that's a very educated response, and I agree. But some people
But
don't like that
I'm
it
pretty
also
sure
has
because
some illustrations
the-
you
well,
might find in a
yikes.
sex education
Thank you,
book.
Twilight.
And one single
Sorry, what?
questionable ancient illustration of 3,000-year-old pottery art that I'll get to later. Some people believe that because of a couple of these pictures in Genderqueer, this apparently makes Genderqueer
A
a
porno
quote-unquote
book?
pornographic book.
There's no doubt this book includes graphic imagery of a pornographic nature.
In fact, I read reviews that are so deeply against this book that they claimed it had pages depicting criminal behavior. That is
What?
some very serious
Did
claims
you even read
for
the
people
book?
to be making, so I read through the entire book myself to be
Well?
safe. Get comfy and I'll tell you what I found. Just a note, I'll be using Spivak pronouns for Maya in our
Spivak?
book, as this
That's
is what I like. Maya put pronouns in a way that really connected with me on page 208.
For me, being called she was like discovering a rock stuck in my shoe, or
Ouch.
getting scratched by the tag at the back of my shirt. A small spike of solvable discomfort.
That sounds like a real annoyance. So
Yeah, I've
personally,
been there
I'm going to try
before.
and make that little bit of effort to try and help that person's discomfort. The story starts in childhood. We get a very quick picture that Maya always has struggled with gender dysphoria, even when she was very young. We get a lot of good examples of this, such as when they go into the water with their shirt off as a child, and the young boys mock him for this, or when they want their hair more boyish. We get one of our more graphic pages when Maya has their time of a month, which for the sake of YouTube flagging videos I will blur,
Yeah.
but I personally don't think this is something that would be too much for teenagers. It could be very relatable to some women, many of who have to deal with this regularly. Eventually I got to what I suspect is the most controversial page in the book, which apparently shows naked art of Plato's Symposium, artwork found on ancient pottery cups nearly 3,000 years ago, as shown here in the Met Museum.
Yeah.
Honestly, this one picture just confused me, as fully
Telling
visible
me.
privates aren't drawn in any other part of the book. Personally, I still feel this book would have been just as powerful even if this tiny piece of art had been removed. But I also don't think this single piece of artwork on one page of a 237-page book about self-discovery
you got
makes
anything
it
else?
a book worth banning completely. And I personally don't think one picture makes it a pornography book. Page 168 also depicts partial course, but 99% of the book shows way less than your average education book for teens, or American Pie.
Of course.
There's another slightly graphic part with no actual private shown, which
Yeah,
is
you got
Noah's
me.
experience getting a pap smear. It has a cartoon sword and some blood through the stomach, and it paints the picture well for me. Sophie from Geek
I
Mom
guess.
commented on this part in her review.
Go ahead, Sophie.
Maya's first experience going for a pap smear was especially harrowing and resonated with me more than I expected.
Overall, if I'd read this as a teen, you know what I would have done? I probably would have put it down because I don't relate to it, because it wasn't written for me. So aside from that one pottery art piece, I personally think all other 237 pages are fine. And when interviewed, I think the non-binary author, Maya Kobabe,
Hi, Maya.
stated her reasons for writing it very well.
Having a book like this, or any book that explored non-binary identity, would have probably taken 10 years of confusion and uncertainty out of my life.
Yeah, it's not really
Number
fun for
4.
any kid.
Looking for Alaska by John Green. You know, the original host of Crash Course.
Really?
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World.
Does a crap ton of amazing charity work for areas like Sierra Leone. John and his brother are inspirations, but they've done so much it
Looking
just makes my
for
head
Alaska.
spin. But apparently
I think
John
I've heard this
still
one.
wasn't doing enough, so he became a best-selling author. And in 2015, his first book became the most challenged book of the year. Looking for Alaska was banned in various schools
what
and
happened?
libraries of the USA, supposedly for offensive language and being
Seriously?
essentially explicit. When the book was banned in his
Eh.
hometown, John was absolutely heartbroken. So what caused so many schools, libraries, and lobbying groups to lose their marbles this time? Well, why don't we
A
let
lot.
John explain the main page that caused the fuss?
The scene in question involves a very awkward and ultimately failed attempt at oral sex, which is described in very cold and clinical language. In fact, the entire passage contains only one adjective: nervous.
Alaska and Mars
Yeah,
are
that's
very
it.
dispassionately attempting and failing to do
Well, that.
But the ironic part is this scene is followed by a more intimate scene where neither character does any scooterly pooping. And yet it ends with Miles simply whispering, "I love you" to Alaska as she sleeps. Sadly, another target of the ban was LGBTQIA content.
It's him, isn't it? The guy you were in love with?
That was him.
A nerd fighter on Reddit reflected with their experience with the book, and it really spoke to me.
It's an
I
amazing
kinda feel
book
bad.
on what it's like growing up LGBT. It teaches a lot about modern LGBT conflicts and ideas starting to come to the forefront, like asexuality and genderqueer.
And another nerd fighter's response felt depressingly accurate.
That's why it's banned.
And you know, I think
Yeah,
John
that sounds
poses
about
a
right.
good point when he talked about the novel being banned.
I don't believe that books, even bad books, corrupt us. Instead, I believe books challenge and interrogate. They give us windows into the lives of others and give us mirrors so that we can better see ourselves.
And for our third banned book,
Yeah, honestly, I'm with him. Because, let's be real, like, if you have to be, like, questioning yourself, like, you're definitely getting the right message out of the book. But it seems like a lot of times, oh, you got LGBTQ, not gonna happen. You got a sexual aspect, no. Like, Jesus, dude, someone get the books out of the Dark Ages here, huh? I mean, think about it. You got shows nowadays that do LGBTQ, but books? Nope. Off the ban list. Like, seriously? Like, you think someone would tell these guys to grow up? You know, the ones that ban them, but, hey, I mean, if they think the books can corrupt them, wait till they see YouTube. Anyway, final theory, here we come.
Book Catcher in the Rye. You know, side note,
Okay,
I really
that's
love
an
this
old
book
one.
cover. Don't these
Wasn't
colors just jump
Okay, I was about
out
to
at you?
say, wasn't
The
it an
Catcher
old
in the
something?
Rye has consistently been listed as one of the best novels of the 20th century. But its censorship goes all the way back to the 1960s. From 1961 to 1982,
From the
Catcher
60s
was
and
the
80s.
most censored book in the United States.
Damn.
Take the school it was banned from in 1978, where, get this, 3 school board members said, "This book is part of an overall communist plot." These board members were
Well,
later
to be
fired.
fair, Soviet Union was
Hopefully
around,
they
so
didn't
makes
fall
sense.
to communism. Ooh, careful or they might start petitioning for free healthcare. Even in the 90s and 2000s, Catcher in
Could
the
use
Rye
that
was
nowadays,
still
actually.
somehow among the most frequently challenged books. Though it was a popular enough book that it also popularized the term screw up. So why all the fuss for
Screw up.
half a century? How bad can it really be? I remember the South Park boys were pretty underwhelmed. Well, back in the olden days,
True.
people took issue with the main character, Holden Caulfield. Our buddy Holden is a rough customer that uses some vulgar language.
Yeah.
Another big concern for people was
Equivalent to today's
blasphemy?
epic.
Really?
Like, goddamn,
If it's in
really?
America, I'm guessing blasphemy against the Christian religion. And get this
Yeah,
reason
that
they
sounds about
listed.
right.
The undermining of family values and the encouragement of rebellion. Oh, I want to meet the tightwads that
Boy.
said all this stuff. They probably said this
got me.
because at one point Holden runs away from school and then plans to run away from home. But the problem with their plan is censorship of the book has often had the effect of making it more popular. And it's almost
Like,
a
the more you block
cliché
it, the more
nowadays
people are
to
gonna
study
want
it in
to
high
read
school.
it to
I've heard
see,
so many
like,
people
why
on
it got
internet
blocked.
forums complaining about having to study this book. Part of the controversy might also come from the fact that this book was in the center of a very tragic event. The murder of Beatles member John
Lennon?
The murderer said he
Oh.
was inspired by Catcher in the Rye for some reason. He even waited
Yeah,
at
I
the scene
think I
of the
remember that
crime
now.
reading Catcher in the Rye until he was arrested. He was given life imprisonment. Now, I'm certainly no expert.
I don't think
but this
there's a
does
connection
remind me of
there.
when people say violent video games cause violence. I personally
But
think
I
Catcher
play
in
'em
the
and I'm
Rye
still
is a
fine.
book that has taught so much
I'm
to
not gonna do
schools
anything.
and colleges throughout history. I think Catcher in the Rye has given a different perspective to many teens of a very troubled teen. But every now and
True.
then, an unstable person is going to break our hearts and cause a tragic event. And they may well have been
True, I
reading
mean,
Catcher
nowadays,
in the
school
Rye,
shootings,
or in modern
yeesh.
times playing Call of Duty. It doesn't necessarily mean that most people are going to become more violent because of violent video games, but violent, unstable people may be attracted to these games. In the end, I
Yeah,
looked at how my
it's just-
community was affected by this book. On my Twitter, readers like Big Blue Dog said,
One of my
This
fa-
is one of my favourite books ever.
Okay.
At face value, it's a teenager drinking and getting into a bad situation in New York. Under the surface, it's all about coming to terms with growing up.
And an old friend of mine
Makes sense.
certainly didn't
Hey,
seem
Christina Roberto.
traumatized by it at all, but rather she was deeply comforted by it.
Holy shit, I love that book. Ever since I read it as a depressed high school student, I felt that it's a book that every teenager should try to read at least once, because it really fucking gets teenagers.
Now, let's
Nothing
move
wrong
on
with
to
that.
what I consider the two most controversial books.
Oh, a double.
Banned not just by lobbying groups, but some federal governments and countries.
Oh, really?
Number 2.
First up,
Mein Kampf.
Yeah.
This translates in German to
My
My Struggle. Ugh, you may have heard of this one. It was
Yeah,
written in
basically,
1925
Hitler's manifesto
by
here.
Adolf Hitler, the leader of the Nazi Party and the genocidal maniac responsible for some of the worst mass murders in world history. And this book maps out his ideology for these atrocities. So obviously, big disclaimer. I'm talking about an evil book filled with groundless racist garbage written in the ramblings of a long-dead psychotic madman.
This is definitely one of those books that deserve to be
That's not
banned.
your thing,
I think you agree with that.
The book itself is an autobiography. Hitler discusses his life and the process of how he became an anti-Semitic, which is basically hostility against Jewish people. Much of
who he
Hitler's
blamed
crazy
for Germany's
ramblings
defeat in
the book
World
are
War
about
I.
how the supposed
But that's not
lesser
close.
races should be controlled by the quote-unquote
Aryan
strong
people,
races.
aka
Ugh. In this case, the German, Nordic, and Anglo-Saxon people. Mostly the Germans. And obviously, most of his angry bile is aimed right at the Jewish people. Honestly, the writing sounds very familiar, as much of his long-winded writing is written with this groundless grandioseness. He's just so proud of himself. But obviously,
Proud to be
his
racist,
ideals have
but
no
this guy.
scientific basis whatsoever beyond his own ego and insanity. But as we've seen, education is not required to rile people up. And as George Orwell said, Hitler's personality had a magnetic allure for many Germans at the time. We must not underestimate the appeal to some people of Hitler's ideas. In this book, Hitler details.
And to be fair, Germany was going through some tumultuous times due to the reparations from World War I, the Great Depression, and not to mention a weak government. So combine all three, and boom, Hitler, right place, right time, writes the book, and thus, big jump to supreme leader. So you definitely got to be careful what you read, but, well, yeah. I'm just saying, you got to be careful. There were a lot of historical nuance that helped Mein Kampf in this case, but let's be real. If that was written today, or at least the better circumstances for Germany, Hitler would just probably be just angry, like the angry guy that people would just ignore. Think about it. He was speaking to the people because he knew they were struggling. You know? In a way, historical context-wise, you could see why people fell for this. Because they thought he was speaking to them because he knew about the struggles that Germany went through because of, well, World War I, the reparations, and, well, thought of just pinning on a scapegoat, and boom, everyone's got their own, common enemy. Kind of like the, temperance movement with alcohol back in the, 1920s. At least before the 1920s. You know? Think of it like that. It's kind of crazy when you think of it like that. Anyway.
Out how he felt
had
the
to point it
current
out.
parliamentary system was corrupt and he wanted to destroy it. According to Wikipedia, he blamed Germany's issues at the time on the Democrats and the Jewish people. Now obviously, all throughout the world, this is considered a highly controversial book. But back in 1939, before World War II was even finished, the book had sold 5.2 million copies and been translated to 11 languages. On Hitler's passing, all rights to his estate, including Mein Kampf, were passed to the state of Bavaria. And Bavaria wanted nothing to do with it. In agreement with the German government, they refused
get that
to
book
allow
out of here.
copying or printing of the book in Germany. So it was, in essence, banned. They opposed the printing and copying of the book in other countries, but it was outside of Germany, so there was nothing they could do. But there are a variety of restrictions on the book in other countries too, such as France, where it was unofficially translated as a warning to the French people in 1934. However, Hitler sued the translator, won, and had all the copies in France seized. What kind of judge hears Hitler in a copyright trial? In a place like the Netherlands, Mein Kampf has been banned ever since World War II. But recently in 2018, an academic version of the book was released. And what about the US of A? Mein Kampf is protected under the First Amendment and can be found in many American libraries. In fact, more than 15,000 copies are sold per year. I guess they're more concerned about banning gay penguins raising families in the zoo. Though hopefully a student carrying Mein Kampf around would get at least one visit to the counselor's office. Personally, I'm glad Mein Kampf has continued to be studied
Never bring up that book
as
ever
a
again.
warning to the past. Because that con man's grandiose words had an undeniable effect on many people. And as I believe Thomas Jefferson said, the cost of freedom is eternal vigilance. Of course, the Germany we know today is one of the most racially accepting and welcoming countries in the world. And for the number one
book?
banned book, the Anarchist Cookbook. I was hesitant to mention
Okay.
this book, but I want to mention it for
don't
both
think I ever read this
historical
one.
and educational purposes.
Go ahead.
Knowing of it, at least, gives us some historical perspective of the 1970s. And realistically, I am certainly not the first person to talk about it. This book has been used for education in universities for decades. But big disclaimer in advance, obviously I
don't
don't
take it seriously.
recommend the book. In fact, even the author William has tried to have it removed from circulation. And the book wasn't banned by some over-religious lobbying groups. It was banned by countries' federal governments. For example, in the UK, people have been prosecuted under the England Terrorism Act simply for owning the book. And over the years,
just own
many
the
people
book.
have owned it whom have caused bombings and disasters. But it's worth keeping in mind correlation doesn't equal causation.
Yeah.
Up until recently, it was refused classification in my own country, Australia. This basically means it's completely banned. The author, William Powell, wrote this book as a teenager. He wrote it around the end of the peaceful protest times of the 1960s. His goal in writing it was to protest against the USA's involvement in the Vietnam War. So to oversimplify,
Basically an
it was
anti-war
written by a
guy.
hippie. So what does this cookbook have? Well, it contains recipes for bombs and weapons. Originally, William wanted his Anarchist Cookbook to provide education to the quote-unquote silent majority of Americans.
Oh boy.
So the intention was to be used by oppressed citizens in defense against a dictatorship. But in time, William came to have great remorse for writing his book. By
Whoops.
1979, William had traveled to Middle East, Africa, and east parts of Asia. He worked at international schools, educating himself and writing about conflict resolution methods. He no longer believed that violence was an acceptable way to bring about change, and he heavily campaigned to have his own book removed from publication. Despite this, the publisher continued to have it published. Part of why they kept publishing was actually an interesting reason. They wanted to defy efforts from the FBI and the CIA that were trying to obtain lists of people who bought the book. It's a rough story for William because despite his regret of the book, as he got older he had a hard time finding employment. He described the book as
a youthful indiscretion or mistake that can haunt someone for many years.
And yeah, I can see publishing a book on explosives and Molotov cocktails doing that. Many years later, William had these comments.
When I wrote the book, I was angry and alienated. Today, I realize that violence can't be used to prevent violence.
I get where he's coming from, but I personally don't think there's a concrete answer. For example, I personally support Ukrainian citizens choosing to learn to defend themselves against Russian military driving tanks down their streets. But I'd also never want to see this cookbook used to hurt people doing peaceful protests. And I would never want to see the book used for acts of terrorism. So yeah, I think it really depends what the cookbook is used for. And again, I'm not recommending this book, and I don't somehow think more people owning this book is going to make a country safer. But I'm also fortunate enough to live in a country where tanks aren't riding up the streets of my city or bombing supermarkets. Anyway, does this book
I'm live in a country where it's school shootings almost every other day.
In fact, this book has been reviewed by the FBI, the White House, the Department of Justice, and Richard Nixon's lawyer for some reason. The FBI left this memo on the book.
One of the crudest, lowbrow, paranoia writing efforts ever attempted.
I get the impression the FBI did not like it. The FBI also concluded
there's tear gas
that it
in there
doesn't
to
incite
explain 'em.
forcible resistance to any law in the United States. Therefore, it was protected under the First Amendment. But even to this day, the FBI has kept records on this book. And you know, in 2002, the cookbook had become so well known that they actually made a movie called The Anarchist Cookbook, where this book is brought to a bunch of anarchists and it actually destroys their way of life. However, the movie was panned by critics and a massive box office failure. But you know, personally, I'll be quite happy to never look at Mein Kampf or the Anarchist Cookbook ever again. But you probably realize the ironic part about most of these books. Censorship has a tendency to backfire. Even if we don't like what's in these books, when we censor or ban a book, it's a damn good way to draw a big spotlight around your book that says, hey,
come and get it!
Your parents don't want you to. And you tell a good academic or scientist they can't read something, and they're gonna study the crap out of it. Well, I hope I was good company to you, and maybe you got some food for thought. And as always, thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time. I was gonna do a member question.
Yeah, honestly, I could see where they're coming from, but they definitely went about it all wrong. Because Well, I think I kind of agree with William, because, whoops, you just gave angry people the reason to, well, make tear gas, I guess. Yikes. I mean, I'm glad some of these got banned, mostly the last two. The others be like, well, that was fucking dumb. I'm just saying, don't ban them. Just tell your kids not to read about them. Don't have to just say, hey, don't read this book, it's full of, well, stuff I hate. Jeez, sorry, I had nothing else to say, but you gotta feel bad for these people, or at least the authors of the books. Anyway, let me know if you actually read any of these books. Till next time, adios.